What's up, everybody? You are watching the Bar Bites podcast, the podcast for law students looking to life hack their legal careers by learning from the most successful attorneys and hearing what paths they took to get to where they are today. I'm your host, Michael Goldfaden, founder of the plaintiff's personal injury firm Goldfaden Law, located here in San Diego, California. Our guest today is Mike Hernandez. Mike runs a very successful criminal defense practice and is actually our first guest that we've had on who practices something other than civil litigation, which is really nice. He's here to give our listeners an inside look at the road to becoming a criminal defense attorney and what it takes to make a name for yourself in this highly competitive field. Some of Mike's accolades are that he's a member of the San Diego Criminal Defense Bar Association and sits on the board of governors for California Attorneys for Criminal Justice. He practices in both state and federal court and has successfully argued in front of California's Court of Appeal in a recently published opinion. He's on the Criminal Justice Act panel, which is a very exclusive federal panel that we're going to talk about later on the show. He's also the loving father of two beautiful kids, Natalia and Santiago. Shout out to them. Husband to Leticia, who works at the public defender's office, and just about one of the hardest working people I know. I'd like to extend a very warm Bar Bites welcome to my good friend, Mike Hernandez. Mike, thanks for being here.
Thank you very much for having me, Mike. It's a pleasure.
All right, the pleasure's all mine. Mike, one of the reasons that we do the Bar Bites podcast, it's for the law students. And we try to give them a glimpse into, these little bites of information, so to speak, of what it takes to become a member of the California Bar, hence the name Bar Bites. And as I mentioned in the intro, I think a lot of our students are tuning in today to hear about criminal law in general, and you come from a very unique background where your wife works in the public sector, you work in the private sector. So my first question to you today is, why criminal law?
I've got a really good story about that, and I almost hate to say that I got into criminal defense by accident. So I came to law school, like I think so many others, thinking I was going to do something, in the civil realm. I had in my mind that I would probably, work for a corporation somewhere, be under fluorescent lights all day long. And when I got into law school, just by sheer dumb luck, happened to be in the same section as a young man whose father and stepmother practiced criminal defense here in San Diego. I didn't know it at the time, but he and I ended up studying together. We would do study sessions at his mom's office. We would have dinners at his house, and we would end up picking his dad's brain, right? So once I learned that his dad was into criminal defense world. And so through that connection is kind of what really fueled my passion for criminal defense.
Was that early on in law school or a little bit later on? What year?
It was actually early on. It was in my first year of law school. So right when we were taking, criminal law that first semester. And then in the second year, when we were doing evidence and criminal procedure, even more so. But it's amazing that I found it by accident, right? I had all these wonderful plans for my career and couldn't have believed that I would have ended up doing criminal defense. And it's amazing because I'm actually quite good at it.
Yeah, I can certainly attest to that. Mike, I've seen you in court many times, and one of the most well-respected criminal defense attorneys here in San Diego. I think that a lot of law students come to law school, and I find a lot of the law students that I interact with or the students in my classes, they are more interested in criminal law from the very beginning than civil law. And I obviously practice more on the civil side of things. And usually the ones that fall into the civil side do exactly that. They fall into it. So at what point in your law school career did you know that this was the path that you wanted to go down?
I think the big turning point was summer after my second year in law school. And I had a pretty grueling second year. And so that summer I was really looking to kind of relax a little bit and, maybe work on my tan, drink a couple of beers. And I had a good friend of mine who called me up and she said, "Hey, I've got a buddy. He does criminal defense work. He's got a really big case and he needs some help." And I told my friend, I said, "Look, I'm really not interested. I want to relax this summer." She says, "Do me a favor. I interned for him when I was a paralegal student. I worked with him while I was a law student. He's a great friend. He needs some help. And I'm like, I am not interested. And she says, please, just give him a call. And I said, okay, look, give me his number. I'll give him a call. I'll tell him, thanks, but no thanks. So I give him a call, leave him a voicemail message. We set up an appointment to meet up like 2 or 3 days later. And I think this will be easy. I'll go in. I'm going to smile. I'm going to laugh at his jokes. I'm going to tell him thanks, but no thanks. I'll be in and out of there in 15 minutes. So I go to this meeting. An hour later, I walk out of his office with the keys to his office and an armful of discovery. And that was a turn. I mean, this guy gave me the rough bird's eye view of this case, which was, if you've seen the movie Boiler Room, that was our case in a nutshell, right?
Wow.
It was, kind of a big white collar case, bank fraud, securities fraud, wire fraud, was phenomenal. And I would have never thought that I would have, kind of dive so deep into criminal defense right away, but it was talking with him, working on that case and recognizing this is where I need to be. This is really, really exciting work.
And so that gentleman was obviously in the private sector, right?
Yes.
So how did you decide that you wanted to go into the private sector versus the public sector? Obviously, your wife, Leticia, works in the public defender's office here in San Diego. So is there something that drew you to the private practice versus the public side of things?
Yeah, sometimes probably gonna have to edit this part. Sometimes the choice is made for you. I'm happy to. I'm going to say it. I'm happy to say it. That no job that I've applied for have I landed, right? With the exception of SeaWorld, when I was a sophomore or junior in high school, was my very first job. With the exception of SeaWorld, no job that I've applied for have I landed.
What did you do at SeaWorld?
Food service, man. I was barbecuing ribs out there at the Ranch House Grill.
Nice.
It's called something now, but I was out there on the grill barbecuing ribs as a high schooler. So with the exception of that job, nothing else that I've applied for have I landed. So I applied to federal defenders and public defenders, both here in San Diego and in El Centro. I applied for positions in private law offices, and that's maybe the universe just telling me, hey, look, it's not meant for you. Maybe there's a problem with me. I don't know what that might be, right? Maybe I interview poorly or what have you. But when that path is kind of set for you, when you don't have an option but to go out on your own and to do it, you make it work, right? And I've got, my buddy, the one whose dad and whose stepmom, we ended up working with early on. That really just set my career on fire, because it was through them that I ended up meeting so many other attorneys in their building, so many other attorneys that do criminal defense work, some of the very best in San Diego. We're really talking about the icons of San Diego criminal defense that I got a chance to work with when I was a brand new lawyer.
Wow. And
to work on cases that I would have just never seen as, a first year or even a fifth year attorney.
Yeah.
So it was largely dumb luck, largely good timing, being in the right place at the right time, with the right attitude.
Yeah. Well, I think it's something a lot of law students can probably relate to. You come from a background where you went to college at Cal Berkeley, right?
Yes.
You went to USD Law School, both great universities. You would think that the job market would open up its doors for you. And I think a lot of our students are probably experiencing the same sort of thing right now. So, I know you, I know your entrepreneurial side, and I know from my own personal experience what it takes to start your own practice. So what advice would you have for a law student who is graduating today in this marketplace with everything that's going on right now with COVID and the shutdowns? What advice would you have for a person like that who's just entering the workforce for the first time?
If you have an idea as to where you want to go, the type of law that you want to practice, try and get in there. If there's an opportunity, if there's a firm or a small law office that's hiring and you can get in, right? Because it's easier to get the experience from somebody who's a bit more seasoned than you. It's easier to find a little bit of that security with an established law office. If that's not an option for you, then don't be afraid to go, all out, right? Set that website up, right? Go get those business cards, go get that letterhead, go get a telephone number. That's all pretty easy to do. Go down to the city administration building and get yourself your city business license and hang the shingle, right? But if you have the option to learn from a good mentor, to learn from a good seasoned attorney, do that. Because it's a little bit easier to learn and to be exposed to bigger cases than you would normally get as a first-year attorney out on your own, brand new, than to kind of have to struggle from the ground up.
We seem to be kind of in a unique profession in that way, and I don't know many other professions, but it does seem to be one of those things where you need that mentor, right? And you need someone to show you the way. And it's amazing to me how the most successful attorneys that I've met, the people that we've had on this podcast, they are also the same people that are the most generous with their time. And I know firsthand how generous you are with your time, always willing to teach anyone who wants to learn something about criminal law. What is it, do you think, that drives successful attorneys to just want to do that sort of thing for other people? Do you think it's the fact that everyone has had that experience themselves who's become successful, or is it something in your DNA in order to become a successful attorney?
I think it's that we have all been there, right? We've all had that older attorney, the guy with a little more gray hair than us, who says, "Hey, let me show you how you're going to go about doing this, right? Sit in. Let me show you how you do that initial client consultation, or let me give you the lay of the land with a particular judge or with a particular prosecutor." So, understanding that I had the good fortune of working with some great attorneys, understanding that some really fantastic people took some time out of their day to show me the ropes, and we pay it forward.
Yeah, it's definitely they call it the practice of law, and it's trial by fire for a lot of it, right? It's like you get sent in front of the judge and you learn quicker from your mistakes than you do sometimes from doing the right thing. But it is extremely helpful to have that type of mentor in this profession. Besides those few that you mentioned while you were in law school, was there a mentor that you had, earlier on in your life, someone that you looked up to that sort of helped you on your path in first going or deciding to become an attorney?
I had, it was fantastic for me, right? I mean, mom and dad were incredibly supportive. And I think my dad would probably tell you it would have been fantastic if I would have stayed in San Diego as opposed to going to the Bay Area. And they were always wonderful champions. But my Uncle Ed was the one who I think really impressed upon me the importance of law school. And so when I had graduated from college, and I was coming out of college in 1997, 1998, and I was ready to work. I was done with school, and all I wanted to do was make a little bit of money. And he pulled me aside and he said, "Hey, look, you got to go to law school." And I was like, "Dude, I'm done with school. All I want to do is
just 3 more years."
Exactly, 3 more years and 3 more years of hard work and stress. And so my uncle, he pulls me aside and he's like, "Look, you got to go to law school." And I said, "I'm over it. I want to work." And he says, No, you got to go to law school. And if you can do it, try to get yourself back up to Berkeley. And I was like, I'm not having any of that. So I needed to have a little bit of tough times. I think I needed to have a little bit of a lack of success, a little bit of failure to kind of get me onto the right path. And as much as I kind of pushed back against Uncle Ed and his idea, I'm glad that I came to see, hey, there is some real value in pursuing some more education, and took the LSAT and applied to just one school here, USD. And I figured if I was going to do law school, I got to do it in a place as beautiful as San Diego.
Yeah.
But it was Uncle Ed. I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing right now if he really just didn't pull me aside and say, law school is for you. You have to do it.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned the environment to study law in. I also went to undergrad at Miami down in Florida. And I started my first year of law school at American University in Washington, D.C.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought to myself, this is going to be the best place to learn the law. We're in the nation's capital. It's going to be so inspirational. And I go through my first winter there, which was my first winter in about 4 years, having lived in Miami for the last 4 years. And I was like, law school is so stressful as is, and you're spending so much time with your nose in a book that you need I think you need that type of environment to fall back on and relax. And I quickly transferred back down to Miami and finished up my legal career down there. But you've obviously had the opportunity to study at two very great institutions and fair weather institutions. It takes a certain type of person to be accepted into a place like Berkeley, right, as well as USD. Were you always studious? Like, how would your teachers describe you way back early on? Like, give me your second grade teacher, student parent teacher night. What's the assessment?
School came pretty easy to me, right? The studies came pretty easy to me, and I can remember early on putting stress on myself to do well. The stress never came from mom and dad. I think that if you would ask them, they would say, yeah, if you got off track, we would put you back on and, you were off and running. It wasn't really until a bit later that, the stress started to really kind of set in. But in terms of studies, it had always been easy up until I got to law school.
Right.
And then I think everyone realizes that you're out of school, you're in a course of study where it's the very best of the best that are there with you, right? I mean, it's the 1/10 of 1%ers that are going to law school. And everyone was a valedictorian or salutatorian of their high school. Everybody was on the dean's list in college. And it's really up to you to perform. But early on, if I could go back and if I could tell, young Mike Hernandez something, it would be, take it easy on yourself. Enjoy your Sundays, right? Because even now, I don't know if you have this, but I dislike Sundays because I dread Mondays. And it was always as a kid, you're doing your homework on Sunday night because you got to get to school Monday morning. And even to this day, and here we are, we're closing in on 50 years old, and Sunday nights are the worst for me because of what I got to do, at the beginning of the week.
Right.
So,
see, I usually dread Sundays, but for a very different reason, because I'm a huge Buffalo Bills football fan, and they usually lose on Sundays, and they've been losing for the last 20 years before this year. But that's different strokes for different folks, I guess. Mike, what were your what did your parents do growing up? What were their professions, and was there any lawyer in your family, or were you the first?
No lawyers in the family, was definitely the first. Dad worked as a communications engineer with Pacific Bell.
Oh.
And mom was a claims adjuster with AAA.
Oh, cool. Someone who I probably deal with all the time.
You probably bump into all the time. And I remember, what's funny about that is that I remember as a kid wondering what does a claims adjuster do?
Yeah. And
it's not until you get just a little bit older and you're like, what they do is in their title. They adjust claims.
Right.
And then, of course, in the practice of law, especially if you handle any sorts of PI cases, you're going to come across a claims adjuster. But that's exactly, what mom was doing.
What did your parents say when you first told them that you wanted to pursue a career in the law?
That was something I said to mom and dad early on. And I can remember being a very young kid and watching things like, Perry Mason, and that's what I want to do. And they were very supportive, very encouraging of that. And it was always interesting articles that they might show me in the newspaper, interesting shows that might pop up on TV that, they would get my attention and say, hey, come watch a little bit of this. But they were very supportive from a very young age.
Yeah, it's got to be rewarding for a parent to have a lawyer in the family, right? To be able to call your son an attorney is probably a very proud thing. Sure. For a parent. You are a fairly new parent, right? Your kids are 6 and 4,
6 and 3,
6 and 3, yeah. Right? What do you want for their futures? You think about that at all yet?
Whatever it is that they decide to pursue, I just want them to, if they can, avoid some of the stress that I have in my life, right? Some of the stress that we put on ourselves. And we put more stress on ourselves than anybody else. Right? My wife doesn't give me any grief about the cases that I take on or don't take on. It's been a very profitable profession to be involved in, but it's stressful. I go on vacation with my clients. I wake up and go to bed thinking about my cases. So it's hard to escape it. And if I had one wish for my children's profession, it's just whatever they do, if they can avoid the same level of stress that I have, they're ahead of the game.
Yeah, and I think that's true, especially of the criminal defense world, right? It's like you are always on call. You have to be there for your clients night and day, and it's probably a unique. It's probably unique to the criminal law practice because in the civil world, you're on call, but nothing is as emergent, I think, as a client calling you and telling you they've been arrested, right? Every second matters. Does your wife, who practices for the San Diego Public Defender's Office, does she have that same sort of stress, or is it a little bit different if you're working in the public sector?
It is the same level of stress, and sometimes even more so, right? It's even more stressful. The clients that we have are just a little bit different. And my clients, by and large, they hire me, they retain me to provide a service. Her clients, she is assigned to them. They don't have any choice in who they get to represent them. And you have to make that relationship work, right? Whereas in the private sector, you do the consultations. You, as a client, kind of feel out your attorney. Is this somebody who I think will adequately represent me? Do I like them? Do I like the way that they talk to me or that they present themselves? And on the other side, for the appointed cases, you don't have a choice. This is your attorney, and let's see if you guys can make it work. And so sometimes there's a little bit of a butting of heads, and sometimes the clients feel that because they are not paying for you, that they can treat you a certain way.
Oh.
And that's unfortunate, right? Because there's probably no better attorney at the public defender's office than my wife. She's absolutely fantastic.
That's a good answer.
It is a good answer. We're going to highlight that.
I think that it's something. It's so hard to communicate that in an effective way to a criminal client, right? That just because someone is assigned to you who works for the public defender's office and you're not paying for their services, the client doesn't understand that those are the hardest jobs to get, right? Those are the jobs that every law student who's in law school who wants to do criminal work, they're going for those jobs. And you have some of the best and brightest people in the world working for the public defender's office or for the prosecutor's office. Did your wife know that she wanted to go into the public sector when she was in law school? Where did she go to law school, by the way?
So she went to Thomas Jefferson.
Mm-hmm.
And fun story about how she came into criminal defense. When she and I first met back in 2004, she asked me how it was that I could do the work that I do, how I could represent people that I know had committed some absolutely horrible crimes. And when we first met, I was working on a double homicide, double attempted homicide. And she said, how is it that you do that? And we had a wonderful conversation, not just about what it means to defend a client in a criminal case, not just about what it is to protect someone's constitutional rights, but what it is to be a shield between the weight of the government and your client. So it was a wonderful conversation that we had. And at the end, she says to me, I think I could see myself being a prosecutor. And I think I have a passion for prosecuting criminal cases. And I said, you should absolutely pursue that if that's something that you want to do. So we get married about 2008. My wife decides she's going to apply to law school, gets in. And as one of her internships, instead of going over to the DA's office, having seen what I do for about 4 or 5 years, she says, I think I want to go over and apply for an internship at the public defender's office. 3 semesters of public defender internships, and her heart was set on it. And so she did everything from juvenile delinquency, adult felony, adult misdemeanor, and turned that into an opportunity to work with the PD's office. And She hasn't looked back since.
That's great.
It really is. It was a fantastic kind of turn for her to go from thinking, I could prosecute to, as a criminal defense attorney, I have to be the best prosecutor in the room, right? I have to know the weaknesses and the strengths of my case. I have to know how the other side is going to come at us. And like I said, she's absolutely fantastic.
So that's something you mentioned that I've always struggled with in terms of practicing criminal law versus civil law, right? This idea that everyone has a right to representation, no matter how horrible their crime is. And I think it's a little bit different if you're in the private sector, right? Because you can still say no to a client if you choose to, right, on moral or ethical grounds or whatever your reasoning may be. What would you say to a student who's grappling with something similar right now, who's in law school and deciding whether or not they want to go the criminal route, and if so, if they're going to go to the private versus the public side of things? How do you explain that to someone maybe who's not even familiar with our criminal justice system, the way our criminal justice system works here in America?
Do the internship, right? Do whatever you can do to spend some time in a law office with a criminal defense, either a criminal defense attorney, or if you can get into a prosecutor's office, get into a prosecutor's office, and spend some time doing that, because that will really steal for you your commitment, whether it's going to be to prosecuting cases or to defending them. But you really have to see how it works, right? You have to come over and experience the state side and see this is going to be taken the wrong way, what a beautiful mess sometimes the state side is. Go and actually watch some of the proceedings. When the courts open up, go watch some of the proceedings. If you can get in with an attorney and go back into chambers and watch some of the negotiations that take place, go sit in on that. It's amazingly confusing, it's amazingly messy, and I absolutely love it. And then go across the street and take a look at what happens in federal court. And you see the incredible formality that is over there. And one of the things I like to do with interns that come into my office is to show them, on a couple different days, how things happen over in state court, where you have attorneys that are talking and negotiating while the judge is on the record. And you come over into federal court and nobody is talking at all when the judge is talking. But get in, any student, any soon-to-be attorney should get in and do an internship, see what it's like to consult with a client, to review discovery, to do a little bit of the research, to try and find a way that you can kind of shield that client from the weight of the government, or to find a way that, the facts line up and it meets all of the elements, and this is why we can prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. Right?
I love that analogy, being the shield between the weight of the government and the individual. That's I haven't heard that before, but I like it. You mentioned two things that I want to touch on. One being internships, okay? And then one is the difference between the state and federal practice that you've obviously have firsthand knowledge in. Did you take any internships in particular in law school that you would recommend our students who are listening in, or do you just have a general sense of any internships that you would recommend for students, maybe even who can't get those highly coveted internships at the PD's office or the prosecutor's office or something like that?
So I'll make this recommendation. Don't do what Mike Hernandez did. I didn't do an internship in law school. Mm-hmm. I can't believe that I was not required to do an internship in law school. And I'm sure that requirement has probably changed. I'm sure that that's something that is in order to graduate, you got to do an internship somewhere. So highly recommend that. If you can get an internship in a public defender's office, if you can get an internship at the DA's or at the city attorney's office, jump all over it. It is a coveted position because it can lead to a full-time career position with their office, right? If you're good at what you do,
yeah,
it really opens doors for you. But if you can't get in, we got tons and tons of great criminal defense attorneys in San Diego. And if anybody out there is needing an introduction to somebody, if somebody says, hey, I want to get in, I wasn't able to get into the public defender's office, give me a call. I'll make an introduction, right?
See, I told you, he's a good mentor.
It's one of those things, because so much of my career was luck, right? So much of my career was just, timing, being in the right place at the right time. I appreciate that. So if somebody needs a hand, if somebody needs an introduction and they need to get into an office and do an internship, give me a call. We'll get them squared away.
Well, I think you're being humble in saying that it was luck, because I personally think that anyone who says that they've gotten lucky in anything, it's really just a reflection of being prepared at the right time, right? So, I still see a lot of law students who, I don't know, I don't see the same work ethic that I necessarily saw when I was in law school just 10 or 11 years ago. And I think there's something that gets lost if you're going to wait for something like luck to come along, right? You have to be prepared, and you have to be the type of person who's ready when the right opportunity comes around.
Right.
And that can be true of any profession that you go into. So while I appreciate you saying that you got lucky, I know how hard you work, and I know how smart you are. And I think that, when those things line up, the right opportunities present themselves. But internships, I think I agree with you. I think that the experience that you get from internships, it's incredible because you actually get to see what the practice is like before going out into the practice, right? Good or bad. I always recommend, if you think you want to be a criminal attorney, go take an internship at a civil practice, right? And see what it's like on the civil side of things. The same way Leticia, you said, thought she wanted to work for the prosecutor's office and then worked on the defense side, and you might change your mind, right? Being open-minded is huge in our profession in particular.
And there's value in taking internships and having that experience in a different field of law, right? Because you don't know what you don't know.
Right.
You get in and you do an internship in a civil firm, and you might not like the fact that all you're doing is reviewing a lot of discovery or answering interrogatories or whatever it is. Right? It is not all that they do. It's not. Making a catastrophe out of that situation. But, if you go over there and you realize, hey, this is not exactly what I was hoping for, I was really hoping to spend a little more time in a courtroom, then, you find an area of law that gives you that opportunity. But, go and get those internships and kind of get some of the nervousness out of the system, right? Because I know what that was like as a law student and as a brand new attorney, right? Well, what am I going to say to this possible client, this potential client? What am I going to say to this client who has retained this other attorney on the telephone? Well, don't worry too much about it. Pick up the phone, make the call. Let's see what questions they have for you, right? Or, hey, let's reach out to the prosecutor. Well, what do we say? You say, hey, this is Mike Hernandez. Can I talk to you about this case? And you get the conversation started.
Yeah. I think one of the biggest differences that I saw between the criminal and the civil world, which I still think is true to this day, I forget if you taught me this saying or if I heard it from someone else, where civil attorneys are criminal to each other and criminal attorneys are civil.
I'm sure that I would have said that to you, but I can't take credit for it, right? Like, those are not my original words. I definitely heard that, and it was my experience as well.
It's incredible because obviously, I've covered some stuff for your firm before, and I've handled some criminal cases on my own. And when you are working with a prosecutor on the other side, it's so civil. They know that someone's liberty is at stake in most of the cases, right? This is what's going on in the criminal world. And yet the way that criminal prosecutors and defense attorneys interact is it's the way that you want the profession to run. I don't know if that's just true for San Diego or if that's true in other places, because I haven't really practiced criminal law too much. I had one case in New Jersey, and I guess it was sort of similar. But on the civil side of things, it's the complete opposite. When money's involved, you are dealing with people who are anything but civil, and it's incredible. I mean, I assume that's what your experience has been like as well on the criminal side of things. Do you have any rhyme or reason as to why it is that way?
I think that really what it is that on the civil side, you might have your entire career and you only deal with one particular attorney once in that career, right? So 30, 40 years, you've only dealt with Michael Goldfaden once on that civil case in San Diego.
Thank God.
Right? So I think that's why people feel like they don't need to be on their best behavior and they can just be absolute jerks. They can try and act like bullies. And on the criminal side, I think that so many times you're going to have defense attorneys that are going to be in the profession for the long haul, prosecutors that are going to be at a prosecutor's office for the long haul. They're going to see each other, on a regular basis. They're going to have cases with each other regularly. And so if you act like a jerk, you got to be careful, because you might not get the best results, or you might develop a reputation in a prosecutor's office, and then it becomes much more difficult to get good results for clients in the future. And the same is true, if you're a prosecutor and you're a bit of a jerk, you can expect that defense attorneys are going to talk a little bit about that, and you're going to find that all your cases are going to start getting set for trial. So
the ultimate nightmare.
It is. But what I found is that the prosecutors, both the state and the federal prosecutors here in town, are just fantastic. You can pick up the phone, you can give them a call, you can talk about a case. It's amazing how quick some of these people are to give you their cell phone and to say, if you want to talk about this case, give me a call. I had an experience recently. We've got a new acting U.S. attorney, and he and I were working on a case a few months ago, and we really needed to iron some wrinkles out. And he said, "Here's my cell phone number. Give me a call." And we were talking over a weekend. In fact, we spent, I don't know, probably an hour and a half on a Sunday chatting about a case, and in the end, it ended up working out quite nicely. But that's what we do, right? You iron out some of these cases, and you're calling them on the weekend on his cell phone.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I mean, just going back on what you said in terms of the market and the civil and criminal world and how you're dealing with the same attorneys all the time on the criminal side, completely true. But I do feel that San Diego in particular is a market that's kind of mixed. And I forget, we talked about this with one of the guests that I had on where I've practiced in New York and New Jersey. And New Jersey, it's small town law, right? So on the civil side of things, you're dealing with the same attorneys all the time. In New York, you might have that experience where you're dealing with an attorney once and you never see them again for the rest of your career. San Diego, I find to be somewhat mixed, right? It's a larger city. It's kind of, there are a ton of personal injury attorneys here, but it sort of has that small town feel. And I think that there's just something about money being involved that changes the way people interact with each other. I don't know what it is. I can't put my finger on it, but it's tough. And, my father, who practiced in New Jersey for about 35 years, he was always, you catch more bees with honey than with vinegar, sure. Right? That sort of saying. And I find that to be true even on the civil side of things, but it is definitely more difficult to catch bees in general.
I have a buddy up in Los Angeles, and he practices primarily in civil litigation. But over the past 7 or 8 years, he and I have worked together on criminal cases throughout Southern California. And he has an approach to negotiations and communicating with opposing counsel that is, far different than mine. And he brings to criminal defense his experiences in civil litigation. So sometimes, he throws his weight around a bit, right? And sometimes it really works for him. And sometimes it backfires. And then I'll come in and, I'll do a little bit of cleanup. But it's just, it's a little bit of yin and yang, right? I mean,
yeah,
it's just a different approach. But I do sometimes wonder how people can go for so long in civil litigation and just be, absolutely miserable to one another.
It's true, because I feel like you learn this in law school, and it's so true when you first start practicing that your reputation is so important, right? And they say in law school, they said it at the swearing-in ceremony here in California, that it can take a career to develop a reputation for something good, and just one moment for being known for something bad. You have one of the best reputations in the criminal world that I've heard of. When I go to court and I represent your firm, people say, "Oh, Mike Hernandez is a great guy, a consummate professional." Like, that's so important. And I would think that if you weren't that way, you would think that you couldn't make it in this profession, just based on how important your reputation is. I'm amazed sometimes at how people have gotten this far by not being professionals,
Right.
It's just, I don't know, a point. Mike, let's talk a little bit about state versus federal practice. You mentioned it before, and I think a lot of students don't have any experience in either sector. So talk to us about some of the differences between the two. And, is federal practice, that highly coveted thing that all criminal defense attorneys want to get to? Is it that next step, or, what does it take to practice in one versus the other?
I guess the short answer, Mike, about federal practice is yes, it is. It's the next step. It is beautiful. It's elegant over there. I absolutely love it. We've got a limited number of judges, district court judges that we have over there, a limited number of magistrate judges. So if you're over there, you're seeing the same judges quite regularly. You're also seeing a very limited number of federal prosecutors. And the state side is also wonderfully beautiful, right? The negotiations that take place. And let me just kind of back up a little bit. The big difference that we have between the state and the federal is the role that the judges play in these criminal cases. So on the federal side, the judges are prohibited from engaging in any sort of negotiation to try and resolve a criminal case. They can participate all they want on civil matters, but on criminal cases, they're prohibited from doing that.
That's on the federal side?
On the federal side.
Right.
And on the state side, we will have these negotiation conferences where we're all sitting back in chambers, and there's 15 or 20 attorneys in back in chambers chatting with the judge about a case, and we're trying to steer towards a resolution. And it's really, really wonderful to see how that kind of plays out. And you have, for example, in downtown San Diego, you might have 3 felony judges that are in charge of kind of negotiations. So you'll get any one of those 3. Your case will go back there. You'll sit down with your prosecutor and you'll chat with them. And it's wonderful to see how the cases get shaped, how they get steered, and how you get to a resolution on the state side. And on the federal side, all of that negotiation is just between the attorneys. Right. So you would be really surprised between the state and the federal. On the state side, so much takes place in the courtroom, in chambers with the judge. It's a 3-way conversation. And on the federal side, so much takes place by phone and by email with your prosecutor, right? It's different and it's beautiful.
Do you find the level of expertise to be different between, negotiating with an AUSA versus someone from the prosecutor's office on the state side of things?
In terms of the level of expertise, wonderfully qualified attorneys on both sides. That's always been my experience, is just whoever I'm dealing with on the state side or whoever I'm dealing with on the federal side, wonderful attorneys. I would say on the state side, when you're negotiating, sometimes it feels like you are perhaps insulting the attorney when you ask to speak to a supervisor. And on the federal side, I have found that the prosecutors assigned on a case might say, hey, I think you're going to have to talk to my supervisor about this. And they're much more willing to let that conversation take place. So on one, you almost don't want to insult them by saying, let me chat with the super. And on the other, they're like, hey, let's bring the super in and chat with them right now.
Right. Yeah. That's interesting. I haven't had too much experience with federal practice, but it's very intimidating when you walk into those federal courtrooms, right? There are these windowless courtrooms. It's almost like the wood on the walls looks like a scary movie or something. There's just something intimidating about it. It's so formal and it's so different than what you're used to on the state side. Like you're saying, that beautiful chaos on the state side of things.
Right.
You have preference of one versus the other?
I love them both.
Yeah.
I absolutely love them both. If there's one thing that I enjoy about the federal side, it's just, the formality. When the judge comes in, everybody sits down, everyone is quiet, there's no talking going on. On the state side, you need to chat with some prosecutors. You're in the back, you're chatting with misdemeanors. And you might have seen this here downtown before the shutdown. You're negotiating misdemeanors with your prosecutor right there at counsel table while the judge is on the record talking about another case.
That amazes me, actually. The prosecutors are listening to the judge while they're negotiating with you. If you can't multitask, that job's not for you.
Absolutely right. And it's amazing because then you'll have the judge talk to the prosecutor, ask that prosecutor something, and without them looking up from their discussion with you, they answer the judge.
I know, right?
It's just, it really is amazing. But I love it. I love the unique differences between the state and the federal practice.
Mike, you recently, or maybe not so recently, were invited to be a member of the CJA panel on the federal side of things. Can you talk to us a little bit about what that is, what that has meant for you personally and for your career?
Sure enough. So on the federal side, we have the Criminal Justice Act panel. And that panel is a group of attorneys that are selected by the local federal court to provide representation to indigent criminal clients. And in order to get onto the panel, there's an application process. You have to have certain minimum qualifications, a certain number of years in the practice of law, a certain level of experience and expertise with federal cases and with state cases. You've handled certain matters, whether it's motions, hearings, trials, sentencings, et cetera. And then there's an evaluation process. So your application comes in, it goes to a panel of attorneys who are already on the panel. They'll take a look at that application and decide whether you move to the next step and whether they make a recommendation that you be included. And then ultimately, everybody who has been, vetted, then gets sent up to the federal court judges, and then they make the ultimate decision as to whether or not you're going to participate. So it was kind of a big deal to apply back in 2018, and I had been approached by a judge, I had been approached by a colleague of mine, and both of them separately, about a month and a half, 2 months apart, had asked me to apply to the panel. And I was like, you know what, I think this sounds like the universe telling me something, right? Maybe I should consider applying. And so I did, and it is a wonderful transformation of my practice. So whereas before it was very, very heavily state trial level work that I was doing, we have now shifted, and we're probably about 75% federal work that we're doing, but we still take on the state cases. And in terms of volume, I was just chatting with somebody from one of the panel representatives, and I think in my first year it was 71 or 72 original cases, some of which were misdemeanors, many of which were felonies. So it's a big volume practice that they give you, but it definitely keeps you busy, and it definitely keeps your face fresh in their minds, because you were always over there, in court and chatting with the judges and the prosecutors.
Yeah, well, I want to ask you about kind of the business side of things for a second. A lot of lawyers are entrepreneurial when they're leaving law school and they want to start out, and it takes something. You have to achieve some degree of success to even be considered for something like the CJA panel to begin with. So, what went into your decision to form your own law firm? And how did you take it from, okay, I'm hanging my shingle, to knowing when you turned that corner and it's now a successful defense practice?
So when this is a good story. Let me get a sip here.
Yeah, bring us back. Bring us back a little bit. I'll take a sip too.
And I'll tell you, I really hope that the students don't take the Mike Hernandez approach to this. This is going to be a good one, Mike.
Yeah, this is a warning to all listeners.
All right. So let me take you back to first semester, third year of law school, standing outside the registrar's office, and a friend of mine, I'm waiting for traffic to die down, and a friend of mine approaches me and says, "Hey, what are you doing?" I told her, "I'm just, waiting for traffic to die down." She says, "Why don't you walk with me? I'm going to head down towards the law clinics." Sure enough, she and I walked down to the law clinics, and she says, "Oh, it's the immigration clinic. You should sit in on this." I'm like, I don't know that I have too much of an interest in immigration law. She's like, "The professor's wonderful. He's absolutely fantastic. You really should sit in on this." I'm like, "Well, I don't have anything better to do. Let me sit in on this law clinic." In an hour and a half, I had decided I need to take this class. This professor is absolutely outstanding. And I ended up doing the immigration law clinic for 2 semesters with a guy by the name of Jam Behar. He's a certified specialist in immigration law. He was running the clinic at the time. Absolutely fantastic attorney. That experience with him led to him offering me a position in his office, which turned into a full-time position outside of law school. So after law school, I was working with him full-time. I was with him for about 18 months before I decided, you know what, I'm feeling called back to criminal defense, and I want to go back. And so I reached out to my buddy, whose dad and whose stepmom, I had studied with. And I called him up and I said, "Hey, Jason, would you mind if I came and shadowed you guys for a couple of days?" And he's like, "Man, come on over." So I had left the immigration law office with about 3 months worth of savings, no real plan, and I took a 3-week vacation to Hawaii. So I come back from that vacation, I call up Jason, I go over and I shadow Jason for a couple of days, and on day 2, his dad calls me into his office. And I'm thinking he's going to tell me, "You got to get out of here because we got work to do." And he says, so Jason tells me you're interested in criminal defense. I was like, yeah. He's like, you want to work a case with me? Like, yeah. He's like, don't you want to know what kind of case it is? Like, I don't care if it's a traffic ticket. And it was a double homicide, double attempted homicide.
Wow.
That's what we cut our teeth on with him. And it was through that experience, through meeting Jason's dad and stepmom, Jen and Gretchen, that I met so many other attorneys in their building, and I started working with them. So right from the very beginning, I was doing a lot of, what we call contract work, right? I was doing discovery reviews, I was doing legal research, legal writing, I was making appearances for all of these attorneys on cases that I would just have never seen, right? As a brand new attorney, you're never going to get a homicide case. You're never going to get something that is serious. Like, you're going to get misdemeanors, and that's okay.
Right.
So I was working as law offices of Mike Hernandez right from the very beginning. And then you reach a point where you've got a certain number of business cards out in the community, right? You've been seen in court. Somebody gives you a call, or somebody's friend gets in trouble for something, and you take on that very first case, right? And there's a little bit of apprehension, a little bit of nervousness about dealing with that very first retained case. But something happens, and you're like, I've got this, right? I know how to do the research. I know how to do the writing. I can tie a tie, and I can, make a good appearance in court. We can do this. And that happened for me kind of, early on. And again, it was, some of it is, can't get a job that I apply for, right? But some of it is, Hernandez, you're good at what you do, okay? You provide good quality representation to your clients. So let's keep it going. And then, I was having some really good success working with, with these other attorneys. I was having some good success getting clients in on, on my own. And you just kind of settle in, and you're like, okay, we've got this. There's a little bit of a safety net doing some work with some other attorneys. There's a little bit of that risk, right? You got to go out and market, you got to advertise and promote yourself and get some new clients coming in. But that's what we did.
Do you consider yourself to be a risk taker in your non-legal life?
Calculated risks, right? I mean,
Yeah,
some calculated risks. So not a gambler, unless it's $1 billion lottery. But there are certain chances you have to take.
Yeah.
Right? There's certain things that you have to do, but it's all calculated risk. It's just kind of interesting that the career turned out the way that it did. And there are certain things that I would recommend to everybody thinking about opening up a law practice.
Yeah, tell us.
Again, don't be Mike Hernandez. You go and get the website immediately, right? Go and buy the domain name
because
immediately.
that's the modern day call.
It's the modern day call,
right?
Totally. If you're not on the internet, you don't exist.
Right.
And so you just have to have a website. You have to have a web presence. I didn't have one set up for 8 years. For 8 years.
Wow.
So when I got into it, I was 8 years behind the ball. And it's like, it's something that we should just do right from the very beginning if you're going to hang your own shingle. As soon as you go get your business license, as soon as you go get your business cards, get the website, get the telephone numbers, get ready to go.
Right.
And get set up,
How do you decide when to start advertising, right? Because I think most people know now the importance of having a website and doing that. But how do you know, okay, I mean, we're talking about calculated risks here, or gambling, right?
Yeah.
If you want to get your website on Google and you want to be competitive, you're competing with people who have these budgets that are astronomical. So how do you decide when's the right time to spend $1,000 or $3,000 a month, and is this going to result in a client for me? And what goes into your decisions when deciding things like that?
That was a tough one. And even now, I try to keep my advertising budget, pretty modest. I have the luxury of doing that because I get a lot of cases that are appointed to me, but also because we've reached that critical mass where we've got a certain name in the community, we've got enough business cards in the community, a lot
and
of former clients,
right? Former
clients.
clients are probably the best source of new cases for any law firm, right?
Absolutely right.
Yeah.
And once you have a certain number of former clients, they talk to other people. You got to have good business cards, right? Business cards that aren't going to crumple, so that way, your former clients can pass them on to somebody. But I like to keep my advertising budget pretty low, because I'm going to get a lot of calls kind of organically. But you kind of have to be willing to commit to spending some amount of money to either get leads, right? And there's lead generation services, people that'll say, oh, we run these various websites, and we know that when people input their information, this is a qualified potential client for an attorney. And so you might pay per lead for something like that. Or you might say, let me generate some attraction to my website. And whether that's through social media, Facebook or Instagram, or any other way, you can do that. And you don't have to spend a whole bunch of money on it.
Yeah, and something else that I find, unique to the legal world, certainly, and something that you've taught me is the importance of a referral network, right? And I think that you had mentioned to me at some point in the past that you recognized very early on how important a referral network is to have, especially in an area of the law that you're not an expert in, right? Can you talk to the students about that? Because I think it is something that's very important for them to hear.
I put together a list over the years of attorneys that I met, that I trusted, that I knew practice in certain areas of law, because that's going to happen, right? As a law student and as a brand new attorney, you're going to have friends and family that are going to come to you and ask you questions about topics that you know absolutely nothing about. And you always want to be able to give them a good referral to an attorney who can kind of get them squared away. And so I started compiling a list of attorneys. And I try not to make this enormous list. You hear guys saying like, oh, I've got a list of 1,000 attorneys that I can refer to. I try to keep maybe 3 or 4 in each individual practice area. Mm-hmm. And people that I have sent clients to in the past, people who have come referred to me by attorneys whose opinion I greatly respect. So that way, if somebody were to call me and say, hey, we're trying to set up an animal rescue, up in Julian, right? And who do we need to talk to about zoo law, right? I can get you a referral to an attorney who does zoo law. You want to have that list. And so when your clients, because it's going to happen, a friend or a family member or a former client is going to call you and say, hey, I've been involved in an accident. Do you have a zoo animal? With a zoo animal. Do you know anybody that does, personal injury? Yeah. Right? Or workman's comp. I was employed. Is there anybody that you can send me to? And to maintain that list, right? And once you have that, once you've been able to pick up the phone call and develop a little bit of a relationship with that potential referral source, with that other attorney, you'd be surprised at what comes through, right? And sometimes you're going to get a call and it might not be anything more than a little bit of a consultation, maybe a consultation with that attorney. Right. But more often than not, you're going to get some good clients out of it. And so you've got it, and that referral source, the attorneys or the law students that you're in school with right now, right? They're going to become attorneys, they're going to be practicing soon. And so, developing good friendships right now and kind of thinking about, where they go in the future and keeping in contact with them. It's a great place to start. My father used to keep a Rolodex with all of this. What's your way of keeping track of it now? Rolodex.
You got a Rolodex. Or you got the website, but still using the Rolodex.
All we have is basically a little spreadsheet, and it's alphabetical from A to Z with the various practice areas and attorneys that might be able to help out. But yeah, the Rolodex is exactly right.
I love it. It's so important and something that I think is really overlooked until you're 5 years into your practice and you're like, why haven't I been doing this? Right. So it's something that if you can get a jump on early on, it's going to be really, really helpful for you in your career. Mike, I want to talk to you about some cases that you've worked on and stuff, but just before we dive in deep there, do you have any hobbies or anything else that you enjoy doing while you're not lawyering?
So it's a boring hobby. I love fishing. So I love getting out and doing, and that's something I've enjoyed.
Like deep sea fishing or fly fishing?
Not at all deep sea fishing. So I do, because I'm a little prone to seasickness. So I do, stream and lake fishing. I can get on a boat, that's no problem. But stream and lake fishing, I prefer to get out and do a little bit of trout fishing. So I love getting up to the Sierras and going and hitting the lakes up there.
Oh, cool.
And it's wonderful. And I got myself into like vintage fishing gear. So I've got a group of spinning reels, some of which are 70, 80 years old, and some of which I think the youngest one is about 50 years old.
Wow.
So we're just using some vintage fishing gear. And it's kind of cool, right? Because you get out and you have an opportunity to get the lines wet. Maybe you catch something, maybe you don't, but it's just a good opportunity to be outdoors. So I'm enjoying doing that. And we do a little bit of, it's a Japanese style of fly fishing called tenkara. So you use this really long, willowy rod. It's a fixed length of line, a fly. It doesn't matter what the fly looks like. And it's just a really cool, very quiet way to get out and do a little bit of, narrow stream fishing or small body of water fishing. So I've been really enjoying that lately. I haven't been out as much as I would like, but that's what we try to do if we can get a weekend away.
It's cool. It's probably cathartic for you after such a stressful life in the law on a daily basis, right? It's like it's the most opposite of being in court that I can think of.
Yeah. It's a good opportunity to get out and have a cigar and a beer at 10 o'clock in the morning, too.
Right.
So,
How did you get into the Japanese style fly fishing? Because I remembered, like, Mike hosts these awesome whiskey events once a year. He has a very famous whiskey tasting where he invites some of the attorneys and judges in the area and everything like that, which I think is just a great networking thing. But I remember that you have some Japanese whiskeys at these events too. Is there something about the Japanese culture that speaks to you?
I've got to think about that. I've got to think about what it is.
Or is it just a coincidence?
And it could just be a coincidence, or it could just be that they've, in terms of the tenkara fishing, that they've really simplified fishing, right? No, there's nothing complicated about the rod. I mean, it's, carbon fiber, graphite. There's nothing complicated about the line. It's a woven cloth line. And there's nothing complicated about the fly, right? It doesn't matter what the design is, okay? It just needs to look like a bug. And that's it. So it's the rod, it's the line, and with any luck, there's a fish in the water somewhere. So there's something beautiful about that. But I also think that the Japanese are right. I mean, they work towards, kind of perfecting the craft. And we've had some fun with the Japanese whiskeys that we have. And I'm not an expert by any stretch of the imagination. I know what I like. I know what tastes good.
Yeah.
And so, we have the same usual couple of whiskeys there from Japan. But I think that they really, strive to achieve some perfection in the practice and the craft. And, maybe without thinking about it too much, that's what draws me to, something like tenkara, something like Japanese whiskeys.
That's cool. I can't wait until COVID is over and we can start doing some of these whiskey tastings. Again, it feels like years that it's been.
It has been. I mean, unfortunately, we didn't get around to doing it last year,
right.
but with any luck, as soon as we get an opportunity to open up, we'll have some people come through, and it'll be a great opportunity to raise a glass and think about what we've been able to get through this past year.
Yeah, well, hopefully we're getting a little bit closer to it now. I'm sure a lot of the students feel the same way with the remote learning versus in-person learnings and everything like that. How do you see this pandemic, now that we're on the topic of it, how do you see it influencing the future of criminal law? Do you see some of these remote hearings that you've had and that you've been going through being the new norm in the criminal world?
I think for certain types of cases, yes. And certain types of hearings, I think we're going to stick with a little bit of virtual hearings, or what we call the VTCs, the video teleconferences.
Less serious
and less consequential court hearings, right? So, prior to the pandemic, for everything, in-person court hearing, right? It was only on the civil cases where you would do court calls and, you paid to do that service. But I can imagine on, some misdemeanor cases, whether it's going to be for a readiness or a negotiation conference, if what you're going to be requesting is a continuance or an extension of time, that you do it by way of video, because it just saves everybody time, right? There's no need to have you come into court, and you could be sitting at your desk. I did this recently where I had cases in 3 different courthouses here in San Diego County. I did it from my desk, as opposed to driving an hour to get up to Vista, right? So I think, at least on the state side, with any luck, we'll see a continued use of VTC technology to allow for handling of the more minor matters. I don't know that we're going to stick with it on the federal side. I think we're likely, as soon as we can, to get back to in-person hearings for everything. And I think I prefer it that way over there.
Yeah.
Right. I think there's just this history of formality in that courthouse, and I would like to see us get back to it. It is really efficient for certain matters, but there's nothing quite like being there in person to deal with the court hearings.
Well, speaking of formality, it's something that obviously you never have a problem with, right? That you're probably the best dressed and most prepared attorney in the courtroom at all times.
I appreciate it.
When you see these Zoom calls gone wrong, as we all have right now, I mean, this is a world that I think the law students are certainly a lot more comfortable in than people of even my generation or the generation above us. But you see some problems with people, especially in that generation above us, who they're just having a tough time adjusting to this world. So, what would you say to students who are now coming out of law school who might be facing this and might be a little bit more comfortable in front of the camera, but don't want to run into these same sort of problems?
Don't be afraid of the technology, but learn to use it, right? And don't be afraid of the mute button and the video cut button.
Right.
Make sure you turn that off. And you've seen the videos, and we've had some poor guys that are picking their nose on a video call with the court. But adopt some of the technology, because this will make your life easier. And I think for a long time, even I was reluctant to move my office towards paperless. We're never going to get there. I prefer paper files just a little too much. But, use the scanner, right? Use the PDF, lighten the load, adopt the technology, but make sure you know how to use it. And if you have an opportunity, because soon enough I'm going to be one of those old guys who doesn't know what the newest technology is. If you have the opportunity to help, somebody out, get them squared away. And I've got a wonderful colleague, a wonderful friend of mine. Been working with him now for about a dozen years. And he's not getting the VTC. He just doesn't understand how it works. And I'm like, you just don't worry about it. You come to my office, we'll set it up. Right. You're good to go. So if that would be my recommendation for any of the law students out there, if they have an opportunity to help someone out, help someone out.
And also try not to turn yourself into a cat.
Or pick your nose.
If you can avoid it. Or pick your nose. Mike, let's talk about an interesting case that you've recently worked on. I know from an article that you sent me about 4 students who were stabbed at Hoover High School, I believe it was. Why don't you tell us a little bit about it? And if you can, give us a take on it that we might not be able to see in the news, right? We might not be able to read about in the newspaper. What is it like defending someone who's been accused of something like that, and bring us into that world a little bit?
So yes, this was a tough case. This is something from 2017, and the articles are still up. The videos are still up on YouTube, and you can find this. And
can you tell us the name of the case?
Absolutely. This is People versus Charlie Rivera, a case out of downtown San Diego, and the videos that are available are harrowing. Right. I mean, it's unbelievable to see what had happened in this case.
What did happen?
So the general background is that my client's younger brother had been involved in a fight off campus about a week prior to the incident that leads to my client getting arrested. And brother's involved in this fight. There's video of the fight, and in the end, the brother ends up getting jumped. He gets beaten pretty good. There is word that goes around over the weekend that there is the possibility of another fight on campus or near campus in the coming week. And these 2 instances are unrelated to each other, but there's just word. And so my client's mother hears from a family member that there's rumblings on social media about this potential fight. And she's concerned because she doesn't want the younger brother to be involved in a fight or have anything happen to him. And so she asked my client if he would walk to the high school and walk the brother home. This is during the summer, in the middle of summer school. My client says, Mom, I'm waiting for a phone call. I just did an interview. The people that interviewed me said that they really like me and, stand by the phone because the job offer could be coming in any day now. And she says, I'm really concerned. Please, can you just, walk your brother home? And so my client walks 14, 15 blocks from his home over towards Hoover High School. And as he's walking, he encounters a cousin of his and his family in a car. And they ask him, hey, what are you doing over here? He's like, oh, my mom asked me to walk my brother home. Could you do me a favor? If you see him, would you just pick him up and take him home? They're like, of course. As it happens, school is letting out. The cousins do see the brother as he's walking out of the gates over there by Hoover High School. And they pull up and they just say, hey, we just bumped into your brother a few blocks back. He asked us to pick you up and take you home. It's like, okay. So he jumps into the car and he heads home. My client walks past and the school is letting out. So we've got hundreds of kids coming out of the school. And sure enough, the rumblings of a potential fight were on social media. The school resource officers and security guards were aware of the situation. They were trying to encourage kids to leave the area. My client, about 20 years old at the time, kind of walks through this throng of people and decides, I better circle back and just try and avoid this crowd and get home. And so he turns down, he's on like El Cajon Boulevard, he turns south on Shamoon Street and is walking behind a group of about 15 or 20 kids. And he's keeping about 30 yards, give or take 25 yards between him and this other group. And the group, or some people in it, turn back and approach him and start saying things to him. It's unclear what was being said. And he turns and he walks back up Shamoon Street and into a parking lot. But he, unbeknownst to him, he puts himself into a little bit of a cage. And he ends up being accosted by a group of kids. They're looking for a little bit of a fight. He pulls out an old broken pocket knife and says, stay back, I don't want any trouble. A kid runs in and sucker punches him from behind. And then he is knocked to the ground and he is kicked and stomped and beat by probably 10 or 12 kids.
Jeez.
No one comes to his aid. Okay. But he swings that knife around, he's flailing that knife around, and he stabs 3 kids while he's down on the ground, and then gets up. The fight starts to move towards, and now it's become a free-for-all because it's not just the kids that have attacked him. There are other kids that are fighting amongst themselves. The fight starts to migrate back out of that parking lot towards the street, and there's an instance where you can see my client kind of run out towards the street, past a kid who's kind of squatting down, runs back in towards the parking lot, past the kid squatting, and then runs over and takes a swing at that kid, and that was a cut that he suffered on the shoulder. That instance becomes important because that's key to how the case gets resolved. But my client gets arrested right away. I mean, the police were there almost immediately. They order him down to the ground. He's down on the ground. They get him handcuffed, and he's arrested. 3 counts of assault with a deadly weapon, all producing great bodily injury because everybody's been stabbed. All 4 kids, using the knife, and in that instance, I want to say it was on a Tuesday, maybe a Tuesday that he was arrested. So he was supposed to have court, within a couple of days. No charges are filed. So he ends up getting released from jail on his own. No charges filed. And by that time, his family had already retained me. They come back, they say, well, look, it looks like we might not need a lawyer after all. And I said, I totally get where you guys are coming from. I think charges are going to be in the pipeline. So, let's just be prepared for that. Sure enough, about 3-4 months later, charges are filed and they go and they pick him up.
How come they did that? I mean,
I think that what happened was, whenever you have these arrests, you're going to have an officer that's going to create a report. Report's got to get reviewed by a supervisor, get signed off on, and get that report over to the DA's office. And then the DA's office needs to review it and make a decision about charging. And I think the delay was the arresting officer and the investigating officers, 1, have to conduct their investigation. 2, they got to talk to the witnesses and the victims.
Right.
They got to put together that report. They got to get it approved, and then they have to get it to the DA's office. And it just took longer than they had expected. And so that's why there weren't charges, right away.
Right.
But as I told him, I said, look, you can't have, 4 teenagers stabbed outside of a high school and expect that charges are not going to be filed. Like, something is going to happen here. And sure enough, just before about Thanksgiving, they came out to his house and said, hey, we're looking for Charlie. And, Charlie is just, give you an idea about him. Hardworking, high school graduate, had gone to medical assistant school and was applying for his first jobs. Sweet little kid, 5'8", rail thin, and it was probably 120 pounds soaking wet and wearing boots. And it was just a horrible turn of events that happened here, because as it turns out, we did 2 full days of prelim on this case. And so let me kind of back us up. We'll talk a little bit about the case procedure, right? So, when we start out, we have the arraignment. We entered the not guilty plea on his behalf. We had a discussion about bail. And the court, obviously considering the nature of the charges, was not comfortable, releasing him on his own recognizance,
Wow.
despite the fact that he had shown up, right? He turned himself into the authorities when they came looking for him. The court was not comfortable letting him out on his own recognizance. Bail was set, at well over $100,000, and he was just not going to be able to bail out. So he remained in custody while this case was ongoing. So after arraignment, we're going to have a readiness conference, a negotiation conference, and we ended up having several of those. We were waiting on the evidence to come in, which included a very glossy, very shiny video that was produced. I mean, somebody spent real time, and they got music, and they cut and edited various videos that depicted this fight together.
Wow.
And I should show it to you, because it's horrifying to watch, right, because of what happens to this kid, and what happens to these other kids, right? I mean, it's kind of sad commentary that, this is what 15, 16, 17-year-old kids are engaging in outside of a high school. But it's horrifying to watch, because, kids are going to get injured. You're going to watch a young man take a pretty darn serious beating. You're going to watch at least one adult walk right through the middle of this fight and not get involved. And you can't necessarily fault them for that, right? I mean, this is a third-party encounter. You got to be careful about what you get yourself into. But absolutely harrowing video. So we had to receive all of the reports, all of the video. We had to get out and do our investigation. We had to start engaging in negotiation. And I remember putting together a mitigation packet. You've heard me talk about mitigation packets in the past, right? So I put together this wonderful explanation of what has happened, right? My version of events, my set of facts, the way I understand them to be, and I lay out all the wonderful mitigation information about my client, everything good he's done in his life, where he's headed, etc. And I asked for a misdemeanor on that case, right? Because of what I thought it might have been worth. It might be worth misdemeanor brandishing a knife in a fight.
Yeah.
And I think my prosecutor laughed at me when I gave that to her. And thankfully we had a good judge on this one. And I said, look, here's why I'm asking for this. Okay, I know it sounds ridiculous to you, but I think brandishing a knife in a fight, that this might be worth it. And unfortunately, what our judge didn't have was the video. She heard description. She heard me describe it. She heard my prosecutor describe it. But she didn't have the video in hand to watch and to see why it was that Hernandez was asking for a misdemeanor on a case like this. So we ended up setting this thing for a prelim. And this is after multiple rounds of negotiation, a sit down with my prosecutor and her supervisor, and then we do a prelim. And the prelim is like the first opportunity that a prosecutor has to present evidence to a judge and say, look, Your Honor, we have a basis to take the case to trial. It's more likely than not that this defendant was involved. And here is the evidence that you need to find that conclusion. It's like a 50% plus one, just a little balancing act.
So that's the standard for a prelim,
for the
whereas
prelims.
The reasonable doubt standard is after that.
Exactly right. And so we have what turned into a 2 full-day prelim, which is uncommon for most cases like this. Most prelims, they might take 30 minutes, 45 minutes. But we did 2 full days. If I'm not mistaken, it was 10 or 12 witnesses. I think we had all of the victims testify, quote unquote victims, all the victims testify, multiple witnesses, a couple of officers. And at the end, the judge said, Hernandez, nice try, asking for misdemeanor brandishing here. I'm going to bind him over on all counts. Okay, so he's going to get ready for trial. After the testimony, after basically taking all of the key bits of testimony from the witnesses and from the victims, presenting that again with my mitigation information to the prosecutor. Prosecutor was like, look, I think we're okay negotiating this case for something less than what we wanted, which was a plea to everything. And she says, so what are you looking for? And I'm like, well, we've seen the video and we've heard the testimony. And I think the one that gives everybody a little bit of heartburn is the kid who was kind of squatting down. He was the last one. My guy ran past him twice and came back and caught him on the shoulder. And she's like, so what are you looking for? And I'm like, probation, straight probation. And she says, okay, let me run it by my supervisor. And then we got the thumb up on that one. And so we had 3 counts that were completely dismissed, and it was 1 count, assault likely to produce great bodily injury. And my client, who had been in custody for almost a calendar year at that time, almost a calendar year, was like, I'm okay with this. I understand. You've shown me this video. I understand, why a resolution like this makes sense. And we had him home for Thanksgiving and Christmas. So he spent, Thanksgiving and Christmas away from his family in 2017, but we had him home by 2018. And it worked out the way it needed to work out in that case. And I got to tell you, for sentencing, probably one of the heaviest sentencing memos I put together.
Yeah.
Right. Even though I knew that I was likely to get what I wanted, which was straight probation. You gotta put on the show.
Yeah.
You gotta give the judge every reason to give you what you want. And so, you're diving into the rules of court. You're talking about the facts of the case. I gave her probably 100 pages of preliminary hearing transcripts to review. And I highlighted them and I said, look, this is where I'm going to direct you to this point. I want you to take a look at this. I gave her copies of the videos to see and said, take a look at this and understand this is what's going on, right? Like, this is not a kid who pulls out a knife and is threatening, teenagers at random. This is a kid who's surrounded. And when you take a look at that video, I mean, there's probably 100 kids in this parking lot that are all kind of milling around. My guy's kind of surrounded, and nobody comes to his aid. And he's down on the ground getting kicked and stomped. He's doing what he can to protect himself. And it's just that last instance that really just turns the stomach. And so in the end, it ended up working out exactly the way we needed it to.
It's incredible, and I think that the thing that stands out to me the most in hearing you talk about this is, I've seen you do this on so many cases. I've seen some of your mitigation packets that you put together, and it's really your ability to get to know your clients, right? To get to know them, their families, and to tell this story that a judge would have no way of knowing if it weren't for that, right? And your attention to detail with your clients and your ability to work hard for them, like you're talking about, go above and beyond in things like putting this sentencing packet together for them. That's the difference maker in my mind, and they're lucky to have you. How did those clients find you?
That was a referral. That came in,
sense.
And it couldn't have worked out any better.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, it really couldn't have worked out any better. In the end, you feel bad because this young man who was at home waiting on a call about a potential job offer, spends about a year in custody. Obviously, couldn't bail out, but it ended up working out exactly the way that we needed it to. He's doing well.
Yeah,
he's doing well.
Well, he's lucky to have you, Mike. We're going to turn now kind of to the last part of the podcast, where we just ask some fun questions and allow you to give us some of your recommendations. So what's next for you, Mike? What are you most excited about that's coming up in your life?
Got a couple of things. So with any luck, we will take a trip to Hawaii here at the end of March.
Nice.
We'll spend the 45th birthday on Maui.
Oh my gosh.
Sipping Mai Tais and working on my tan. And then if things kind of open up, maybe we'll take a trip and celebrate my wife's 40th birthday in Paris in the fall.
Cool.
So kind of looking forward to that. Long term, I don't know. We've got our eyes on a couple of places. It might involve a bench and a black robe, but we'll see what happens.
Oh, very cool. Very cool. I like it. Start the campaign now.
Exactly right.
You can.
Yeah.
Do you have any books that you would recommend for our audience, whether they're legal books or just personal favorites of yours?
Anything Calvin and Hobbes. So that's a good one. I mean, kind of keep things light. So anything Calvin and Hobbes. There was a book that I read years ago. I mean, we're talking almost 20 years ago. I borrowed it from a buddy of mine when I was in law school, and it was How to Start and Grow a Law Practice. Did you ever see that?
Mm-hmm.
You ever see that? Okay. How to Start and Grow a Law Practice. It's probably a fair bit dated right now, but it's got some interesting, bits of information that would be useful. So take a look at that one. I've picked up Eric Dyson's new book. It's a discussion on race in American society right now. That's an interesting read.
You're probably reading a bunch of children's books right now too.
Lots,
for your kids, right?
Yes. I Love You to the Moon and Back.
There you
lots
go.
Of, lots of children's books, but we do so much reading. And
I know.
The cases, the treatises,
Yep.
Whatever it is, we do a lot of that reading. And if you can pick up something that's kind of light, kind of easy, if it gives you a little bit of an escape, if it gives you some ideas, and that's a nice thing about our profession, right? Like every book you pick up, everything you read, every show, every documentary, every television, whatever it is, right? You can use that in your profession somehow. You're going to draw a quote from, some movie or some play or some book, and you're going to incorporate that into a sentencing memo, or you're going to incorporate that into a legal brief somewhere. So, read. Be involved, be interested in something along those lines. But,
Absolutely.
Even Calvin and Hobbes, you might be able to find a line from Calvin and Hobbes that you can throw into a sentencing memo.
I like it. Mike, where can people find you? Can you give us, are you on Instagram? Are you on Facebook, Twitter?
So again, don't be like Mike Hernandez. I think the last time I was on, I do have a business Facebook page. I think the last time I was on it was probably 3 years ago. So again, the recommendation is set one up, keep it going, draw some attention to the law office that way. But yes, I'm on. I've got a business Facebook page. You can find me, at defenseattorneysd.com. You can give me a call. And if you catch me on the streams and creeks up in Bishop or Mammoth, we'll have a beer and a cigar.
Very nice. So, what's your office phone number and email address?
Sure enough, 619-341-3149 for the office phone. And the email address, mine directly, Michael, Michael, at defenseattorneysd, as in San Diego.com.
Fantastic website.
It's a good.
That's a great. You couldn't have gotten a better name there.
And I got to tell you, Mike, like for anybody coming into the practice right now, find something kind of cool, even if it's just your name. I bought Natalia Hernandez, .com. Just buy your name, buy something.
Yeah, and own it.
It's so worth it and so inexpensive.
Yeah, very smart. Mike, you are always so generous with your time. I want to thank you so much for being here and being our guest on today's podcast. I'm going to officially sign off now. Everyone, you've been listening to the Bar Bites podcast with our guest, Michael Hernandez. I'm your host, Michael Goldfaden, founder of the plaintiff's personal injury firm, Goldfaden Law, here in San Diego. Thanks so much for tuning in, and thanks for being here, Mike.
Absolutely, buddy. My pleasure.
All right.